Hey, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever you happenstance into the Truth Bomb riff. My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm the producer of The Con at www.thecon.tv. And also newly, which I'll lay out here momentarily, really the ultimate execution of what we've been trying to get done for now a long time without even realizing this is what we had to do. But we created a website that puts it all together that you can find at www.thecleannewdeal.org. But I'm recording this on Tuesday, September 10th, 2024, on the eve, in a couple of hours, of the debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and, of course, Donald Trump. And there's a lot of action, and everybody has something to say in every direction, whether it's mainstream media or whether it's social media, of which, if you've been reading some of my stuff recently on X particularly, you know that it's all bullshit. And what's happening at the moment, which is just so, at the same time, glorious but insane and slightly um, just creates mass confusion. But at the same time, it's the truth, and it's the forest for the trees, and it's all of these, wonderful children's fables, all wrapped into the one. The one that comes to mind first, of course, is what I always comment on, is the Emperor's New Clothes, and then the forest for the trees, and Orwell, and etc. But guys, what we're going to see tonight really is the first incarnation of what's going to take place over the next 2 months, where over $1 billion is going to be spent making the case of the prosecutor versus the felon. And of course, justifiably so. I mean, it's absolutely insane. We're in this predicament, this pickle, this insanity of all things that has enabled a guy like Donald Trump to literally be in a position where he has influence over 70 million plus people that have completely lost their minds. People that I refer to affectionately as the MAGA zombie apocalypse spreading Trump contagion. But conversely, many of you in the know, and those that know the system and understand how things work, are like, yeah, but Patrick, you're not putting all of your faith and credit in everything that you've been doing over the course of the last many years into Miss Kamala Harris. And like I've laid out before, no, I'm not particularly, even though Miss Harris, the technocrat, the prosecutor, someone who is light years beyond Trump in terms of capability, is by far the more pragmatic choice of someone to actually helm the professional class as a manager of this technocratic empire, right? That has the largest nuclear stockpile in the world and weapons that can deliver anywhere on Earth, and a very outsized reach of influence and control over global this and that, that the likes of Donald Trump and his kin are trying to usurp and hijack because they want it for themselves. And so, yeah, it's the prosecutor versus the felon, but therein lies really the ultimate revelation of what yours truly, Patrick Lovell, has been producing and showing you for the last many years, and has taken up literally 13 years of my life and led to this glorious moment, this glorious sort of application of everything that I have endured to get to this moment, to try to break through this sort of this semi-permeable membrane to your brain, to the people that are out there, to understand that it's just simply about the tumor of corruption. And really, what are our choices? So we're probably given this sort of a an illusion, if you will, that even if Miss Harris, in all of her glory as this sort of professional, shall we say, charismatic, joyous expression of the best amongst us, because she does come from the middle class, and she has overcome a lot to work within the system to really generate what appears to be a platform, at least much more, shall we say, clear than anything Donald Trump has ever set forth, which is nothing, quite frankly. But the Harris campaign tonight, I think what they consider a victory is to be able to establish really what they plan to do if they win the presidency. But the crazy thing is that they have to overcome and prevail and triumph over a freaking criminal, which shouldn't be hard. but it's a lot of things to a lot of different people. And at the same time, the technocratic professional class wants to maintain this sort of aura of, um, I already said professionalism, but it's more than that. It's more of like the nature of those that are put into positions to manage, because CEOs and board of directors and everyone else can never really reveal panic, can never reveal anything that would construe someone's sort of interpretation of who they are as someone who aren't credible, as someone who can't, with all good conscience, implore and explore and expose and matriculate the sort of composite that is necessary to be in a position like the president of the United States. But as many of us actually already understand, is that really, and Joe Biden has proved that to us. Even though I do like Joe Biden, I've said a lot of very affirmative and positive things towards Joe Biden, even though I'm very aware of his 40-year, 50-year history in office and all of the elements that go into that, including none other than actually, I think, being the key vote during the Clarence Thomas hearings that would ultimately lead to the ultimate corruption of the Supreme Court. But that being said, we've been in a pickle for a long time. And so Miss Harris's sort of thought process is that we've got to turn the page, and that we're going to etch a sketch really everything that created this darkness, this sort of subhuman in, humanity of all things Donald Trump, who we can all recognize, any of us who aren't part of the MAGA zombie apocalypse, who've had our minds lobotomized by this Trump contagion, and those who actually do believe in law and order, that do believe in the functionality of the dynamism of not only the American sense, the American form of government, i.e., democracy, and the nature of the laws, of course, expressed through a prosecutor in this particular situation, which would imbue the notion of integrity of law, that then, of course, also basically promulgates what is, kind of our glory, if you will, over the course of the last 50 years, even though the subterfuge of it all is really the ultimate betrayal. But the notion of our great economy, this the manifestation of, through capitalism, this dynamic market-based free market economy that enables the best amongst us to rise to the top with the greatest products or innovations or whatever society or the globe needs to be able to move us forward. That also provides a lot of incentive and reward for those that take risks to invest in some of the greatest technological breakthroughs or medical breakthroughs or corporate breakthroughs or whatever it is. And that's kind of the idea of what this country is supposed to be about. But what I have revealed over and over and over is that we're not a democracy. Yeah, we hear terms bandied about like kleptocracy or corporatocracy or some sort of form of oligarchy, and all of that is true. I call it simply a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses the full faith and credit of the United States to squeeze blood from the people of the United States that are now expendable, to guarantee the mafiocracy that I show you in the con and in my website at thecleannewdeal.org, among many other efforts, such as 518 Truth Bomb Riffs on YouTube, as well as a podcast that we did called The New Untouchables that reveals the sum total of what's not going to be discussed this evening. Because the media doesn't want to, or simultaneously, it doesn't know about it. And I mentioned this actually on Twitter last night to a great deal of reaction, that Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC publicly lambasted the New York Times for being incompetent, for having an entire arena of political commentators and reporters and the expertise of the best in the business that go through these processes of editorializing and professing things that they're legally accountable to as well, that have basically, I can't remember the term, it was like whitewashed all of the insanity of what Donald Trump has been prognosticating for over 10 years. And what he's saying is that Donald Trump, all he does is lie. And as I've mentioned to many of you before, the formula for Donald Trump is what I learned in my fraternity many, many, many years ago, which is lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. I always thought that was kind of funny and interesting under certain circumstances, and anybody can be Machiavellian and anybody can play the game, especially if you understand how the game is played. It certainly makes a lot of difference if you're sitting at a table of craps or poker or Texas Hold'em, obviously poker, or blackjack or whatever game that exists in the casino or in the sports book or whatever else, that you understand how the game is played. And if you become a master of how the game is played, well, then you improve your chances at winning at that game. Yeah, that's just the nature of democracy. Sorry, the United States in a capitalistic in sort of environment or paradigm, because that's the nature of what we're all supposed to be. That's this sort of like this river, if you will, of our existence, where wherever we're born into society, the idea is that we can go wherever the journey takes us, that we can be our own oar, we can be our own sexton, we can be our own engineering scenario where we can determine the outcome of our lives based on the law being equal and fairness and opportunity. Those are sorts of the sorts of balance, if you will, between the nature of the government and the governed through the consent of the governed, because the belief is in the nature of what this country rebelled against tyranny to create: separation of powers and the integrity of law created through the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And that's the paradigm. And so none of us can manifest this notion of like, well, my God, how is it possible that we're in a case that we literally have a presidential election where we're going to have one debate where former AG of California and prosecutor Kamala Harris is going to be basically put under the microscope and at whatever time frame this evolves into, where we know, for example, that the moderators from ABC are going to be clueless and gutless, and they're not going to be jam packed with the information to be able to slow down the train wreck of Trump nauseating, bloviating lies. Because the second he opens up his mouth, he's puking lies, because that's what he does. And the only way you can fight lies is to basically ignore him and go right for the jugular and say how he's guilty, because you already have all that information. And therein lies really what I think is going to be a brilliant sort of roadmap, if you will, between the prosecutor and the felon from this point forward, that should hopefully tie together many of the elements that are important. But however, you have to understand this going into it. As I've mentioned again in some of my ex tweets, and I think I've mentioned it recently on a new edition that we put on our website at thecleannewdeal.org, because we make the entire case to the grand jury of the American people, given all of the elements and the factual evidence that I have of what it is I'm about to engage you in, to set forth that what we're looking at is a red carpet mirror reflection of everything that I'm telling you that they won't. And so you've got to begin with what is Donald Trump being indicted for, and what has he been convicted of, where he's convicted of 34 felonies and also the civil violations that I'll go through to build this case. That you've got to understand that if any of these elements are relevant, that really stand the test of like decades in the making, if not really going back to evidence, decades long. Okay. If that's still relevant in the case in 2024 of how you're going to vote. And let's not forget this. Okay. There's some key players involved. Like, for example, former Attorney General Eric Holder, who came out like 3 months ago, right around St. Patrick's Day, where he said, he wiped his hands of what the legal system was going to be able to do to bring justice to Trump, and says it's up to the voters. The voters that Eric Holder betrayed in a monumental way that is baked into what it is that I'm telling you. And Eric Holder and his former boss, President Barack Obama, in their consortium would include the AG of the most powerful state in the union, based on really just people and money and all of the things that exist in California, Miss Kamala Harris, who played ball, and her campaign is now demonstrating kind of a perversion of what exactly happened, because you can obfuscate and play games with people if you don't understand the lay of the land. It's called deception. all of us understand football, right? We've all seen the game of deception. That's the whole idea of plays. Certain circumstances and scenarios, like what down and time of possession and where the ball is and what's been going on in the game and the momentum and everything else. And you're trying to constantly deceive your opponent to get the upper hand. I'm a big football guy and I'm an expert in football, and I call it the 3 E's of football: explore, expose, and exploit. Same thing can be said with politics. But going back to this monumental debate tonight, it's going to be really fun to watch the prosecutor, I hope, rip apart who I define as a treacherous, literally felonious, with all of these felonies and the treason of the transactional magnitude of the corruption under Trump for the ultra rich, the uber rich, the ultimate oligarchs around the country that Donald Trump has continued to perpetuate throughout his entire career, that I have evidence of, and I've explored and exposed this in many of my Truth Bomb riffs with interviews with guys like David K. Johnston and David Enrich, which will come into play here momentarily. But the nature of the law of the land, or the lay of the land, as it is going to be exposed tonight, is that literally Trump is guilty of rape, both metaphorically and physically, with E. Jean Carroll, as we all know, right? And we obviously know he can't stand, colored people, unless, of course, he's promoting them in one of his casinos, like we saw throughout the years in Taj Mahal with Iron Mike Tyson and some of the others. But he was also, owner of the USFL, and there's a lot of black players. I mean, so they were transactional, right? I don't think he has a whole lot of respect for anybody who's not part of his, advantage, white privileged class. I mean, that's pretty much clear based on the ongoings and the revelations of who Fred Trump was, his father, and all the nature of the business with the KKK that's led to the America First and all things that Rachel Maddow has revealed in her seminal podcast, Ultra. But further to that point, I mean, it's just like everything he does is in, complete perversion and predation and intimidation to A, women, and B, people of color, all of which are exemplified by Miss Kamala Harris, who's from the middle class, who's self-made, who's very intelligent, who's a technocrat, who is for the common person, which is the way we always thought of America, because America was born to revolt against tyranny, because we don't like absolute power of kings. That's the entire purpose of the American Revolution: separation of powers, Bill of Rights, and the Constitution, of which, of course, the African-American led Supreme Court of the United States in 2024 was revealed to actually etch a sketch through corruption, because the likes of Harlan Crow were paying for Judge Clarence Thomas his frickin' mom's house and giving him RV and luxury trips as sort of quid pro quo on all of those sorts of things that would lead to him in upside down flying flag Justice Alito, which, by the way, and I had said in an argument on X before, that whole symbology came from none other than abolitionists demonstrating that the democracy was in distress. And it also is the Navy that demonstrates what happens when their vessels are sinking. The upside down flag was actually a symbology of those that are on the right side of American history, not to be confused with the right fascist Republican goon, MAGA zombie apocalypse side. But yet therein lies what happened during the insurrection, and the upside down flag that was flown over Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito's house, that was sending the message that I'm with the insurrectionists, only to have the Supreme Court make the ruling on the 14th Amendment, Section 3, which says concretely that if you're an officer of the United States and you engage in insurrection, you are not to run for office of the United States, not to mention that being the CEO of the United States, i.e. the president. But of course, the Supreme Court just etch-a-sketched that away because of corruption. Does anybody not know that? Does anybody not know that corruption is really the elephant in the room that's going to be in the midst of all of this as we look at the prosecutor versus the felon? But as I've demonstrated and opened up the door to, and you're going to walk through and you're going to fully understand that Miss Harris, and again, I'm going to vote for her no matter what, because we can't have an actual fascist autocrat that's as stupid as Donald Trump as president of the United States, which is exactly what I said in 2016. And here I am in 2024 saying the exact same thing, only with another 10 years of evidence, not to mention what the New York Times did, that Lawrence O'Donnell had, correctly and outrageously pointed out, or through outrage, pointed out the outrageous behavior of the editorial staff of the political, the political journalists of the New York Times that have completely dropped the ball, which all media has done because of what I'm revealing to you. So the nature and the magnitude of the prosecutor versus the felon is simply that Donald Trump has been indicted 91 times and convicted in 31 felony convictions for the sum total that basically decries that he defrauded through deceptive acts and practices the United States through a myriad of ginormous efforts of falsification of business records, lying on taxes, lying on appraisal values of his penthouse, lying on the electoral scheme through racketeering to steal the election, just like he was stealing money from banks. But why was he able to do that? Because that's our system. And oh yeah, surprise, unfortunately, Miss Kamala Harris, and this won't come up in the, unless it'll be really funny if Donald Trump brings it up. But Miss Kamala Harris let Steve Mnuchin, who came out of Goldman Sachs to be the CEO of One West Bank, where he had a consortium of billionaires to basically prop up through the Federal Reserve scenarios that I've been revealing to you through the illegal use of Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which I'll come back to, that helped manifest billionaires being able to prop up the market for their own behest as kind of like a Svengali facade of the free market that was going to prop up the largest, real estate market in the United States, of which Ms. Harris had Steve Mnuchin dead to rights on, I think it was north of 100 cases of fraud. And I'm sure he was involved with literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and potentially the statewide, definitely millions of these cases that I'm revealing to you, which all manifested through the falsification of business records and perjury in the courts by attorneys and judges ruling to allow the guilty to get away with it, of which at the apex of this thing was a guy by the name of Steve Mnuchin, who became Donald Trump's Treasury of the Secretary. That's a pretty amazing trick, isn't it? For somebody who is supposedly draining the swamp, for all of you suckers that are part of the red hat made in China wearing Trump MAGA zombie apocalypse, spreading Trump contagion. Yeah, it's a fool's fucking errand, and you guys are fool's gold because, and you can't make this up, because the Obama administration with Eric Holder, our former Attorney General of the United States, who was the head of the Department of Justice, who is responsible and who has the firepower and the resources and tens of thousands of employees and billions of dollars of budget to do the job of the American people, of a government of, by, and for the people that depends on the actual integrity of the system, which are simply the laws and people interpreting the laws and making the arguments based on the methodology of how these cases move through the system, but ultimately through the grand jury of the American people, which is what you are on the other side of this as you're watching the debate. And it's up to you, according to Eric Holder, to be able to save democracy. Boy, what an amazing piece of work that is when you consider that Eric Holder enabled and allowed tens of millions of falsification of documentation fraud that were used by a corrupt legal system and judiciary to illegally bury tens of millions of Americans doing the exact same thing that we are indicting Donald Trump on. Falsifying business records to defraud the United States using deceptive acts and practices, and racketeering using forgery on documents to steal. It's quite a quandary, isn't it? It is a real epic problem. But that's why I made the con that you can find for free because all of the American people buy our lies at www.thecon.tv. But more importantly, you can now find because we've got the entirety of everything that I've been channeling through YouTube or X or on Facebook back in the day when I still did it. But we conglomerated it all into the clean new deal, which is the lifeline, which is the life raft, which is the only way to save democracy and the United States from this mayhem of corruption. Because what we're looking at, and you all know this, and it can be demonstrated very easily. I could talk at length for hours upon hours upon hours, all of the players that are involved. But for example, I mentioned Steve Mnuchin. Okay. Steve Mnuchin became Treasury Secretary under the Trump administration to do exactly what the Obama administration did to illegally backstop moving tens of trillions of dollars into the financial system that had rug pulled the world and blew them up in the largest racketeering enterprise in the history of the world with tens of millions of felonies that built what it is that I'm revealing to you. And then we had these laws after that incredible collapse, which was kind of a Faustian bargain with all of the Democrats at the time that included Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and everybody else who followed their lead because, of course, they had millions of people following them because they were supposedly standing up to the corruption. But ultimately, we had this law, this huge legislation. I think it was 1,600 pages of really detailed, embedded, legalese in the Dodd-Frank Act to prevent what took place to create the great financial crisis from ever happening again, except that they enabled the Secretary of the Treasury to be the one caveat that could utilize Federal Reserve Act 13.3 to be used in what we call exigent circumstances to save, the United States in times of great peril. But nowhere does it say in the statutes, my friend, that peril is defined is racketeering using, every methodology under the sun of lying, stealing, and deceiving, like Donald Trump is being indicted in this whole scenario that we know he's corrupt and he's guilty. But it's this system that created Donald Trump. Get it? That's what's so remarkable about what this moment is, because Dodd-Frank literally said that only the Secretary of the Treasury could override the laws of Dodd-Frank to prevent anything from happening like that again, which we called moral hazard, which is a polite term for theft, for criminals that we let get away with it. And by the way, Eric Holder in all of these settlements, literally in the $250 billion settlement cases with Bank of America, Chase, and Wells Fargo, and Goldman Sachs, I was about to say Government Sachs, and a few others, literally they had all these statements and facts, and they do all of this discovery where they say exactly what I'm telling you. But of course, the media didn't report on it. And then ultimately, Holder told the world that he's like, look, we hold the right to basically bring criminal prosecutions against these financial apparatuses for what it is that I'm telling you downstream. But of course, they never did. Now, interestingly enough, Kamala could do it. She really could. If millions of us got on board to force her to do exactly what she's saying to do, to resurrect the middle class. Because everything that I am revealing to you is what propped up the likes of Donald Trump and this billionaire apparatus. As I've said at the beginning, we're not a democracy. We don't operate as a capitalistic country, okay? Capitalism requires risk. There is no risk in a sure thing. For those of you who've been to the casino, it's like you getting to the blackjack table and someone's talking in your ear and telling you everything that's going on. Or if you flip the situation and you're the dealer, you have all the cards, man. I mean, who doesn't know this? Not to mention the law. You can't deceive people, which is what we've seen over and over in all of these indictments. And you can't do that using falsification of business records. It's a felony. And it usually leads to explosion of your company, which of course we just saw Letitia James, another very capable, smart African-American woman who's the Attorney General of New York, who got the freaking conviction against Trump for all of these things that I'm telling you. But when the media, and it led to a $450 million fine, and the fact that he basically got the death penalty for his businesses, where he can't do any real estate in New York for, I think it's some total of like 3 years. It should have been the death penalty forever, quite frankly. But the bottom line is that it's like nobody in media asked the question, well, wait a second. If he was lying to banks, if he was like hyperinflating his appraisals, if he was like using this to steal and he's guilty of that and at least do a $450 million fine, why was he guilty? I mean, why would the bank lend to him? Doesn't the bank have internal mechanisms where they have professional appraisers and they can send people out to go see what the square footage of your penthouse is? Yes, they do. But again, they also have guys like Vladimir Putin who are laundering billions and billions and billions of dollars throughout the globe into London and into New York, the city of London, through Deutsche Bank, which is a German bank, but it may as well be a Wall Street bank, and it has been for some time. And by the way, for those of you who ever saw The Big Short, the whole commingling of how supposedly the hedge fund guys that figured this whole thing out got a lesson in how the whole thing worked by a guy representing Deutsche Bank, who was, Ken and Barbie, whose name eludes me. He was a fantastic actor. Sorry, he wasn't the focus of this at the moment. But the point is, it's been out there, and there's a lot of ways that these stories have been told, but nobody's put it all together, which is what I'm doing with you for everything that I have. And so where does that leave us, man? It leaves us in the revelation of a monumentally corrupt system that is out of control, and you can't etch a sketch all of this stuff. Oh yeah, I was trying to finish up the idea about the Secretary of the Treasury, because really, when you understand my work and you understand how I continue to say that Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally to backdoor tens of trillions of dollars to the largest racketeering enterprise in the history of the world. And again, the statutes do not say that the full faith and credit of the United States, A, can be used to save private assets. First and foremost, that's in the statutes. But second of all, that you can't basically bail out those that are breaking the law on a global scale. But that's exactly what we did. And so the caveat to the whole Secretary of the Treasury thing came out of allowing Steve Mnuchin to override the backdoor channels of Federal Reserve Act 13.3 under exigent circumstances. And what did he do during COVID? He bailed out corporations to the tune of trillions of dollars. We all know that, right? And I was always amazed when I was looking at that, and it included none other than casinos and cruise lines, and of course airlines. I mean, there are certain things that that make sense, but at the same time, it's like a lot of these corporations were throwing money into the bonuses for their CEOs while laying people off, while being involved with PPP fraud and all sorts of other things under the sun that were all made possible because really what this whole trajectory enables from the Federal Reserve into the financial sector that operates through the shadow banks, which interestingly enough, my favorite frickin' propagandist in chief, Elon Musk, who I just heard is in my town, and I actually would like to go see if he is. But Elon Musk has been saying all over X today that the United States is close to going bankrupt, which means that he's a complete fucking idiot because he has no idea what it means to be the United States. Because we have sovereign currency, we have, our own currency that we can issue our own debt and we can buy our own debt. And yeah, we do sell the debt all over the world, but that's also intrinsic to everything that I'm telling you. The United States government doesn't go bankrupt unless, of course, the people of the United States decide to stop using dollars and have the full faith of the dollar and the currency and the value of the currency and buy in. And that's what we use in our modicum of exchange and currency and everything else. That no, we can produce as many dollars as necessary to fund our government, which is what we do. And we're not going bankrupt. Ironically, the shadow sector, the asset managers and the hedge fund guys and the private equity guys, and all, they can go bankrupt. But they're the guys that we've been giving free money to the tune of tens of trillions of dollars that backdoor to the likes of Elon Musk, who's nothing more than a welfare queen that gets subsidized by the United States to be so stupid that he says out loud that he thinks that we can go bankrupt when he's actually the recipient of the moral hazard that I'm telling you because he's morally bankrupt, among other things. But going back to the Secretary of the Treasury, that all manifested because the guy that Kamala Harris let go from being guilty of insane fraud became the Secretary of the Treasury under Trump to do it again. And it didn't end there. Janet Yellen and Biden bailed out Silicon Valley Bank and all of these other banks during the meltdown last year of their own incompetence because of interest rates and all of those things that go into it. They're just ridiculous because regulators should have prevented that from happening anyway. But it's just, again, this monstrous revelation of everything that I've been telling you the whole time is exactly what's going on. That Lawrence O'Donnell, literally, rightfully so, but it's fucking ridiculous when you consider that when he blew up and he called out the New York Times for being completely incompetent, for not knowing how to basically unpack Donald Trump's lies as it relates to tariffs, which any high schooler in the country, according to him, should be able to discern. And I agree with that. But what I'm telling you is monumentally bigger. And oh, yeah, by the way, I worked with people at the New York Times. And I do have reason to speculate that one of them might have sabotaged me, which is part and parcel to how all the story got quashed and how I had to try to create all of these workarounds to manifest what it is that I'm telling you. So I'll finish up with this. Look, guys, there's 4 composite questions that we all have to ask, okay? That reveals really the truth of what we are. I'll set it up with the greatest analogy I've ever heard, which came from my era of independent filmmaking in the 90s, which came great people. And by the way, I just heard that that Harvey Weinstein, I think, had a heart attack last night and might be close to dying. That would be pretty wild, all things considered, but because he is the same freaking adulation as Trump in the same age range and this whole garden variety of these freaking fraudsters that had come up at that era that use predation to basically control outcomes and everything that he's guilty of. Like I just said, my favorite executive producer, even though he's a complete asshole, Harvey Weinstein, and of course Donald Trump. That's the same type of shit, right? So I was going to say that because I was referencing Quentin Tarantino, but Quentin Tarantino didn't make this film, The Usual Suspects, where Kevin Spacey said the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. And then I always parlay that with another fabulous film in the 90s that starred Denzel Washington as Ezekiel Rollins when he said, I got tired of them pissing on my head telling me it was rain. They must have thought I was some kind of new fool. That was my whole story to get this information that I'm providing you. And what I'm telling you is the tens of millions of Americans out there that are going to be on the edge of your seat tonight watching the prosecutor versus the felon without this knowledge is basically you're on your knees blindfolded with your mouth open, and they're not only pissing on your head, they're pissing in your mouth, because you got to put together the 4 questions. And I use that as to allude to to Passover, the 4 questions of Passover. The 4 questions is what is the synergy? What is the connectivity? What is the relationship between qualified immunity, the illegal use of Federal Reserve Act 13(3), presidential immunity, and the Electoral College? Does anybody know? Well, therein lies the reality of what our country is. So for those of you who's like probably centerpiece, and we saw yesterday Tariq Hill from the Miami Dolphins get pulled out of his Lambo and put on his stomach right before his Miami Dolphins game yesterday because he was speeding and driving recklessly. And I'm not laughing because it's a serious situation, because if a guy with his resources and his notoriety can be yanked out of his car and basically treated like we saw everybody in the midst of Black Lives Matter. And I don't know all the circumstances of how he's driving and everything else, but at the same time, it just seemed to be a display of like who's in control here, right? I mean, it's like that's the ultimate expression of what LBJ said. If you can convince the lowest rung white guy that he's higher on the rung than the highest rung black guy, you can pick his pockets all day. But I thought it was interesting timing with Tyree Nichols, right? The anniversary of last year's murder of this kid who was this cool skateboarder videography guy that, was afraid for his life and made a run for it, that was driving recklessly, that got completely, devastated by the police in Memphis, Tennessee. And he died, right? It could have happened yesterday with Tariq Hill. It's hard to say Tariq Hill and Tyree Nichols, it's kind of ironic, but that's qualified immunity, because the police can claim that they were in defense of their lives and they can use lethal force pretty much without discovery or intent to understand exactly what they did. And that can be extremely problematic in a country that's supposed to hold everybody to the same law. It's a caveat. It's a loophole. It's like, wait a second, that's a misuse of power. And I'm not saying that I don't think that cops should not have guns and be able to use lethal force when required. Would I like to see them take out terrorists? Yeah. Or people that are burning down buildings and doing things that are, potentially going to, you know, kill innocent people. Yeah. I mean, there's circumstances for everything, but I'm not going to make that case. I'm just making ultimately the semblance of the notion of perversion of power through qualified immunity. And that's, of course, leads us into presidential immunity, where the Supreme Court of the United States said the exact same thing of Donald Trump, who could lead an insurrection after being involved with tyranny and basically backjoining channels of billionaires from around the world to stuff his own pockets. And I have reason to believe, and I have this from the highest sources, that Donald Trump may have pilfered more than $1.5 billion while he was in office, while doing favors for his friends around the world. Is he anti-war? No, of course he's not anti-war. He's transactional. Hey, Kim Il Jong or Vladimir Putin or MBS or whomever, pay me billions of dollars and I won't put our nuclear weapons up your ass, sort of thing. Really. Not to say the military industrial complex and Dick Cheney and Darth Vader 1.0 is any better. That leads to, the CEO, Larry Fink, who is Darth Vader 2.0, who actually runs the United States government and will, even if, Kamala is elected. That's the whole point. Who's running the show now? BlackRock. But who was running the show if President Trump wins? Blackstone. Who was Larry Fink and who is Steven Schwarzman? They were partners for many, many, many years, decades. And they were the recipients of Federal Reserve Act 13.3, where they managed for themselves at the behest of everyone else, yours included, because I had all the evidence, and they quashed me just like Donald Trump's David Pecker did to Stormy Daniels when she was going to go public. That we now found out that's a felony. Yeah, that's what they did to me with the $71 trillion truth that I'm revealing to you. But it was BlackRock. Why? Because BlackRock managed the emergency stimulus that I'm revealing to you was illegal to basically pick winners and losers in the economy, which is obviously not capitalism. And they control the world, man. And by the way, I will say, in light of Darth Vader, Godspeed to James Earl Jones. What a profound, powerful human being, and everything that he ever did. And I will sorely miss him. But I'd be amiss if I didn't actually bring that up at the moment. But going back to the light and dark side of the force, honestly, when you think of the absurdity of what we're talking about here in the election, guys, by way of, and I'm going to vote for Kamala no matter what, because we don't have another choice. But this binary choice, based on what the system controls, is this, ability to whitewash and etch a sketch everything that's going on. Like I said, the nature of qualified immunity, the nature of presidential immunity that came through judicial Supreme Court corruption and an insurrection to betray the United States, which is by and for the people. That's all you need to know. But how did they further do that? Well, hey, therein lies the fourth question that I had brought up, which was, what is the Electoral College? Well, that's what gave us the Supreme Court that we have. It's the perversion of, the majority. It's how the minority can win. It's the likes of like Wyoming with an exorbitant amount of billionaires having as much probably legislative influence in the state of California with 50 million Americans. It's a perversion of power. Yeah, I get why we did it initially, but it's also come down to, like, in 2020, it screwed up the election that would have given us obviously, former vice president under Clinton, Inconvenient Truth. Why can't I think of his name? And I've read all of his books. It'll come to me in a minute. But then, of course, in the 2016 election, and then, whatever we're facing downstream now, oh, by the way, I do want to mention this in terms of Rachel Maddow, because Rachel Maddow never told us any of these stories, and she had the capacity, just like the New York Times, to reveal everything that I'm revealing to you. And they all hid it from me because they're all getting paid by it. And that's just the whole systemology of corruption. Okay. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you find a group of people in society that discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it, which is what we're in the midst of. And then it's a tool in the full circus scenario to play this one debate, in this so-called democracy that didn't have any debates all the way through, because that's what we used to do in the primary process. No, this was a preordained situation to where it was like the Wall Street meritocracy Democrats versus the new Confederacy that is part of what I call the internet. Let's see, because I think of Alex Jones when I think of this all the time, because Alex Jones always talks about, you know, the international cabal of which he's a part of. Alex Jones is getting paid by Elon Musk and Putin to squeal like a pig for them with all of this insanity that he does. And he's one of many that I, you know, put down in this, I think, epic article that I wrote called Pimps, Whores, Junkies, and Parasites, which is our entire system. That's our entire system that you know, Lawrence O'Donnell was pointing out correctly. That's leading us, you know, into this situation where we got to question the moderators, because they might not be able to handle any of this stuff because they're not even knowledgeable of any of this stuff, to be honest with you. Okay? Once again, the prosecution versus the felon. They don't even know what Donald Trump is guilty of, let alone what Kamala Harris let Steve Mnuchin get away with. That led to a government of, by, and for BlackRock and Blackstone, of which none of us voted for, even though a lot of shareholders have benefited from the last 13 years of the upside of giving tens of trillions of dollars to this absolute insane financial terrorism that has destroyed the middle class, that supposedly Kamala Harris is going to save, right? But here's the caveat to all of this, okay? And I do like Kamala. I like her a lot. I think she is charismatic. I think she can line dance way better than Trump can do anything, quite frankly, with his just disgusting toupee and all of his drivel and all of the lies and all of these freaking bloviating morons that basically rape and pillage and roofie their idiot freaking followers to the tunes of millions. But is she our savior? No. She's working for the system. And if if Barack Obama is any measure, Barack Obama was worth like $4 million. I think he and Michelle, when they went into the presidency, I know they're worth north of $150 million now. Eric Holder, the former AG of Covington and Burling, or sorry, I got that. That's actually a great faux pas. I should make a t-shirt about that. Eric Holder, who was the former AG of the United States, he just went right back into the office, the corner office at Covington and Burling, where I know he got huge bonuses and huge salaries that were monumentally larger than he got as the Attorney General of the United States. So who are they working for? They're working for who pays them. Do you think Miss Kamala Harris might be kind of in the same vein, even though we know she's monumentally better than Donald Trump? Yeah. But here's the caveat that I think that Eric Holder made a mistake. And I mean this sincerely, because Vice President Tim Walz, I should say Governor Tim Walz, who is going to be hopefully our next vice president, was not created in a white collar law firm. He was not created in a hedge fund or a private equity firm or Wall Street or, you know, one of the Ivy League institutions. No, he wasn't. He was created in the National Guard, in public schools. He was a high school football coach. He was an educator. And the question that I posed to him was, is the United States, in anything that you taught your students throughout your career, it's funny, I'm getting confused and tongue-tied on what we should call Tim Walz. I should just call him Tim Walz, but Governor Tim Walz. Was the United States, did you ever teach this to your students, that the United States was concocted based on everything that you've taught them based on our history? Through, again, the American Revolution and the creation of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and of course, everything that led to the Civil War and all of the problems that we had that created and manifested civil rights because of Jim Crow, and everything that would lead to the war of over fascism and everything else, to landing a man on the moon and all of the aspirational, inspirational aspects of the human experiment that you yourself exemplify. Because you put your dues in, right? You were National Guard for 25 years. You were a principal. You went to the state championship. Hoorah! Good for you. I know you're a real guy. I know you were not corrupted. And I have read that you tried to put a stop to TARP, or you were against it back in the day, which is not what we're dealing with. What I'm dealing with, TARP was $700 billion that you were against because of all of the right reasons. I'm talking $71 trillion, Tim. There's 1,000 billion and trillion. Where are you going to get the money, Tim? Where are you going to get the money? By the way, should we, this is the one thing I would throw at Kamala. Really, if we had the $71 trillion truth, do we have to do what BlackRock wants us to do and drill, baby, drill, which is exactly what Trump is running on? We're the largest producer of oil and gas in the world when we know all of the elements of climate change and climate disaster, and we have all of the answers to get to a renewable energy, paradigm? Can we spend $71 trillion on better things than corruption, people? Was the United States, Tim, created so that we would prop up billionaires and billionaire apparatuses to be above the law and market forces while they skullfuck the United States and get away with it? Is that what the United States was for? Is that what you told your students, Tim? I know it's not what you taught your students. I know it's not. And if you rolled your eyes, and if millions of us asked you this on the campaign trail, and if you rolled your eyes and you said, that's ridiculous, I'd be like, check out my website, Tim, www.thecleannewdeal.org. Because why? Because we've got to create a new Glass-Steagall. That's the first point of the Clean New Deal. And by the way, the Clean New Deal is in the telemetry, the parallel, the alliance and slash respect of all things that manifested on the progressive movements that basically made America in order to form a more perfect union, from Teddy Roosevelt's trust busting and everything that manifested that, into the New Deal of the FDR administration and everything that manifests. This has always been a battle between the evil and the darkness and the light, guys. And so we've got to create a new Glass-Steagall, which came from the guy that I channel every day, Ferdinand Pecora, that we learned all of these lessons after the Great Depression, so that you separate commercial banking from investment banking so that you don't have casino capitalism, which then leads to vulture capitalism that, of course, Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was not created to provide a pipeline to the villains that are destroying the United States. Of course not, Tim. You got to create a new Glass-Steagall Act. And I know all the experts who can actually put this thing into place, starting with Art Wilmart. And if you want to know who he is, just look at my Patrick Level Truth Bombs, the Con. He's in there. And what do we have to do next? We have to end Citizens United. Why? Who doesn't know that Citizens United is legal corruption through what we call shadow donations, shadow money? Hey, is anything good happening in the shadows, people? I mean, sometimes when like you're freaking out of your mind and you're doing stupid stuff, you might think about it at the time, but really does good things happen in the shadows, or does good things happen in light? I mean, that lacks subtlety and credulity, does it not? That Citizens United is all about dark money from shadow factors that are the shadow sector, by the way. Of course not. It's corruption, and they're pissing on your head, telling you it's rain while you're blindfolded on your knees with your mouth open. So those are the first two bullet points. But the third is we've got to demonstrate how $71 trillion was stolen from the American people, looted by destroying the soul of America. It really was. They ripped into the heart of America and they yanked it out because corruption and complicity and duplicity and the smart people saving themselves at the behest of the United States. That's what's been going on for the last 13 years. Is there a better way to spend $71 trillion than on corruption, people? Yes, there is. And when you've got the truth, you're bulletproof. They can't piss on your head telling you it's rain. That's what the cleannewdeal.org does. That's what the Con does. That's what the New Untouchable does. That's what 518 truth bombs do. While everybody is lying to you, I have been bringing you the truth to enable us, the American people, to rise with righteous fury and indignation to rip the control of power back from the corrupt to the American people, the way it was designed, and the way millions of Americans had sacrificed blood and treasure over the course of 248 years for us to inherit. So is there any answer that we can't solve? Of course not. We just got to pull our fucking heads out of our ass to do it. And then that leads to the final points of the Clean New Deal, which are, well, if you can do all of that, well, then you've got to actually undo qualified immunity, presidential immunity, all of the corruption in the Supreme Court by creating 13 justices. This is kind of a Band-Aid for the moment, but you've got to create, ultimately, you've got to create not just ethical standards, which is ridiculous, you've got to create legal standards for corruption in the Supreme Court. Who doesn't think that Judge Clarence Thomas and Alito and probably Kegerator Kavanaugh shouldn't have everything that they've ever had donated to them in their country clubs and whatever else and their private trips and everything else? And they should, A, be kicked out of the Supreme Court, face jail time, and then have any freaking upside in terms of real material support yanked back. These guys are making like $250,000 a year and they have these plush assignments that are the rest of their freaking lives. Should they be held accountable in a nation that's supposed to be accountable of, by, and for the people, where the law keeps everything equal based on the integrity of law? What's a stupid question? Of course. So you end the corruption of this. By the way, ladies, ultimately, ladies, this is the biggest question of all in terms of your own autonomy. Really, how did all of this manifest? So that what do we call the fratricide and the paternalism and the kind of like the white supremacy and the theocracy and all of it based on thousands of years of bullshit nonsense that kept you in your fucking place. I mean, don't you want to be liberated? Don't you want to have autonomy? Don't you recognize cause and effect? Don't you recognize that the corruption is what's corrupting, that's controlling you? That's the whole point. You're not free when they can control how you do things. And they know all of the situations that you've been through. Of course not. That's what Miss Harris is saying correctly. That of course, we have to trust you. Of course we trust. I don't know. I was born, in 1968. I grew up with liberation. Of course, women have a right to choose. Are you kidding? And especially if they're raped by their father or whatever, incest, or like we see constantly from Donald Trump. Yeah, he was involved with Epstein the whole time. And guess who funded Epstein? All of the guys that I'm telling you from the financial system, okay? And then, oh yeah, there's more. If you want to go into the worm brain, Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, who likes to make a claim that he knows all of the answers to this stuff, but he's playing for the bad guys. The insanity just doesn't end. And so that leads us to the points of all of this. So you have to end the qualified immunity, presidential immunity, and the Supreme Court, and you have to end the theocracy and the perversion of our democracy through what we call the Electoral College. That's the Clean New Deal, people. So yeah, I've got all the answers. It's in www.thecleannewdeal.org. It's in the con at www.thecon.tv, which is the blueprint for how all of this works. And then because the system quashed me, I have all of the rest of the information in the New Untouchables, all of which we posted on our website, as well as the solution of the Clean New Deal. My friends, listen, it's 2024. Everything's on the line. Listen, we've had climate problems, for the last 30, 40 years based on this paradigm of fossil fuel, that we now have the apparatus and the innovation and the technology to move completely off of fossil fuel by reframing the paradigm of the energy paradigm, which I believe is somewhere in the $7 trillion range. That would rebuild the American middle class, for one, and there's a lot that could go with that. But is there a better way to spend $71 trillion? You've got to be able to see the forest for the trees. You've got to understand that who the emperor's new clothes is, or who's wearing them, and why we're all not pointing to it, who the complicity is, who's the complicity. We've all been managed like chattel to basically be shoved into the slaughterhouse, people. I've been dealing with this for 13 years. It basically destroyed my life, but I was redeemed. And that's what this whole process and this journey is about, is redemption. So you have to stop lying. You have to stop buying lies. This is the effort to bulldoze the misery of tyranny, to unleash the renaissance of possibility. It's called the Clean New Deal. Will you please become a nuclear reaction to the big bang of truth that I'm dropping? Will you hashtag truth is marching? Will you hashtag Patrick Lovell, the producer? Will you hashtag the Clean New Deal? These are the questions that we have to ask. And I again, we focus it to Governor Tim Walz. Governor Walz, was the United States erected so that we would provide billionaires tens of trillions of dollars to them and their apparatuses illegally, to put them above market forces and the law so that they could betray the American people? Do you know what that's called, people? It's called the aristocracy. It could be called techno-feudalism. Why were we born in the first place, America? What is the point of the American Revolution? It's time to have another revolution. It's time to have the revolution of your mind, your heart, your body, and your soul, Because if you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, that believes in dignity and decency and integrity and accountability and beauty and sustainability, if we merge in unity and we pound the truth to the misery of tyranny and we forge the clean new deal, that is our destiny. And therein lies, we will create a renaissance of possibility. People, I've been pushing this truth up to the top of Mount Everest backwards without shoes on. And if tens of millions of you join me and we push this sucker over the peak, can you imagine the force multiplier to just rip down the mountain face and basically take these bowling pins of corruption and send a strike to the moon? To the moon, baby. Enjoy the debate. Onwards and upwards.